Go. Hi,
Hi,
everybody.
everybody.
So today we have got something really exciting to talk to you about, and it is neuroplasticity. And this is something that the yin yoga world particularly, but also the yoga world, is something that is missing within the yoga practice. And it's such an integral part of how we live, how we respond to things, our patterns, our beliefs, our behaviors, just our general consciousness of being a good human and understanding where those things come from. And of course, we can bring it into our yoga practice, and specifically the yin yoga practice. So this is what we're going to jump in and dive into today.
Yay, my favorite topic.
Yeah, so Anna's doing a lot of research and studying and training and everything, teaching and everything in this right now. It's kind of like the hot subject in Shanti Atma Yoga right now. So why don't you start us off and just tell us, we've spoken about it before, but tell us a little bit more what we're going to dive into today, and also why it's super important.
Yeah. So we're going to dive into today kind of the 7 principles of neuroplasticity, and we'll go into this in a moment. But for those of you that missed the live last week or hearing neuroplasticity and thinking, what is this? This is basically our brain's ability and design to change and adapt throughout our lifetime. And the amazing part about this is that we have the ability to play a part in this. And this is so important to understand in yin yoga because of the nature of the practice, both during the actual practice and afterwards, is that when we are taking students and ourselves into the practice, we are quite literally in the brain, thinning that veil between the conscious and subconscious mind. And as we study the brain and what happens in these lower brainwave states that characterize the yin yoga practices, we realize that we are creating this space of susceptibility and vulnerability to programming in the brain. And that can lead us into a topic of what are programs in the brain and what is subconscious programming. But we need to understand, as far as the brain, that absolutely everything, always, not just in yin yoga, is being imprinted onto our minds. Everything we see, everything we hear, everything we ingest, what we read, who we talk to, the conversations around us, the television programs, all of those are being processed by our brain, whether we're aware of it or not. And specifically when we're in these lower brainwave states, we're really susceptible to kind of bypassing that longer neurological process to imprinting something in the brain and making it quicker and faster. And that's something really beautiful. So when we're in yin yoga, we can, as teachers, understand this and be really conscious of what we're saying, how we're saying it, and the messages we want to give our students, so that they can disempower programs and behaviors that they don't want and empower themselves to embody states of being that they do want. So that was a really long way of saying the yin yoga, we can employ these 7 principles of neuroplasticity to help our students take control of their programming, to take control of who they are and what it is that their brain is doing.
I love that you were talking about you were saying this. So one thing particularly that I see jump out was the characteristic, these characteristics of yin, but not everybody would say, oh, a characteristic of yin is actually bringing the brainwave states down into that frequency of theta, because often it's not spoken about. It's not spoken about on trainings,
Right.
in books. It's not associated with yin yoga. Neuroplasticity isn't something that we talk about, and that is why we're bringing it up all the time in Shanti Atma Yoga, because we believe it to be super important as a practitioner of yin, and also as a teacher of yin yoga. Just like you say, we've got to be aware of the potential that we have, but also the potential harm that we can do if we're not aware of these certain things. And as we go into the 7 principles, you're going to see how they are very integrated into some of the principles of yin and yoga and the philosophy of yoga and Taoism. But one last thing I want to say before we jump into that is that, when we are in those brainwave frequencies, when we're thinking about yin, we don't tend to think about the brain. We do tend to think about meditation, but we don't often connect it to the brain. So one thing that I would really like anybody who's watching this to think about in terms of yin yoga is what is happening in the brain. And of course, we can do a live around that, but we have a whole 50-hour training about that because it's so important. So let's dive in to the 7 principles of neuroplasticity.
All right. So just to kind of give them all at one time, and then we'll break them down a little bit further each. We have mindfulness, we have choices, intention, focus, repetition, emotion, and belief. And an important thing to notice when you hear all of these is that they kind of all begin and end in the mind. So we'll get into that. But
yeah, so beginning and ending in the mind, essentially, and this is a Buddhist belief now, this is a Buddhist philosophy, is that every single thing happens in the mind. Scientifically, yes, it does, but also philosophically, yes, it does. Every single thing comes from intention. To an action, a thought comes from a pure or an impure intention, and that is a Buddhist belief. And so you can start to notice how we have the yogic belief, the Taoist belief, the Buddhist belief, the Western scientific belief. They all seem to merge into the same place, trickling down and overlapping. And that is why, looking at all of this stuff is so incredible, because I don't know what the word is, but it just comes together like a merging of everything together, and it just makes sense.
That's you hit the nail on the head for me personally. Why this is so interesting is because I come from an academic background in biology and science, and this exact topic that we're talking about, this merging of philosophy, is right where science and mysticism meet, and science and spirituality meet. And I think that's why this is such a beautiful topic to consider, because it's, just as breath is a gateway to all these things as well. Like studying the brain and neuroplasticity is kind of the bridge between science and spirituality, because it all starts and ends in the mind. The beginning and end of all of our experience is the human nervous system.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we jump in with the first one, mindfulness? And they are in a particular order for a reason. Someone just said it's 11:11. That's a sign of something. 11:11. Okay, go with mindfulness.
Yeah, so mindfulness is like we can't, all of this is to become aware of our programming, aware of when we're on autopilot, aware of when we're acting unconsciously. And at the root of all that, we can't work to change our thoughts and modes of being if we aren't aware of them. So mindfulness is really becoming aware of how we are and who we are in the present moment, moment by moment. And this isn't going into changing anything, just simply being aware of when we're being triggered, of how and why we're acting the way we are acting or thinking in any particular moment.
Yeah, and also just to note is that it's not to be aware and then love what we're seeing. It's not to be aware and suddenly realize that we're this tiny little Buddha inside and we're all perfect. It's to be aware, to just open up the eyesight, the insight, the wisdom of the reality, to be aware so that we can know how to move forward. And again, bringing that to Buddhist philosophy, that's the meaning of vipassana, to shed light, to see the truth how it really is. And that's to walk the path of Dharma, just like it is to connect with Tao, to not lie to yourself. That's what it is to bring ahimsa into it, not harming, truthfulness, all of the principles of the yamas and the niyamas. And, it's all so interconnected that when we're being mindfulness, whether we're talking about neuroplasticity or we are just bringing it into yoga as a mindful practice or life, we are not necessarily going to like what we see. We are probably going to have times where we hate ourselves and we feel shame and guilt and, all of these things. But mindfulness is not there to show ourselves how much we love ourselves. It's to show us how much we can do to get to that place. Mm-hmm. So, and as you dive into mindfulness and you connect it to neuroplasticity, you'll notice the stories, the narratives that come up in your mind. That is how you then notice the patterns that you either wiring in yourself consciously or unconsciously, or you're being wired in from your external sources, the people, the books, the music, your friends, your family, the environment, and it all comes down. The mindfulness is the root of neuroplasticity because it allows you to become aware of all of these things. But it's not just becoming aware of your breath or becoming aware of your thoughts. In terms of neuroplasticity, it's becoming aware of everything, your response, your automatic response, your narrative, your just every single, lots of different things. It's not just, oh, I'm thinking or feeling this. It's going a few steps deeper in terms of neuroplasticity.
I love that. Yeah, just being familiar with our mental landscape. What you said reminded me of, the word is escaping me, but in Tibetan, the word for meditation translates to from becoming familiar with self,
Mm,
becoming familiar with yourself.
mm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
absolutely. Oh, and that takes
Next,
us
we
into
have,
the next.
oh.
Yes. So that takes us into choices. Now, just one thing to remember in these seven principles, it's not one or the other, it's one and then the next and then the next. We layer on like a yummy birthday cake, you know?
Mm.
So the next one, choices.
Yeah. And I think I mean, at I hate to say surface level is not what I mean, but at the soil of our understanding of choices, it's about, are we making choices in our day-to-day life that are conscious or unconscious? But beneath that, the kind of the roots of that is realizing that we make so many choices throughout our day that we aren't aware of and that are informed by our subconscious programming. So each choice we make gets recorded in our brain. And the more choices we make, or the more repetition, we'll get into that in a moment, of choices we make, they are feeding into our future choices. So really it's, yeah, if we repeat the same choice often enough, it's wiring itself into our neural pathways. So being conscious of every single choice that we make, even though that's impossible, a better way to say that would be being conscious more and more of the choices we make, from the grand to the small. We can learn to empower ourselves to make choices that are more conscious. It's kind of like exercising a muscle. Is the more you do it, the stronger that it'll get.
And also to realize that you do have a choice in literally everything you do. Of course, we're not choosing breathe in, now choosing breathe out, now choosing breathe in, now choosing breathe out. Like, we do have an autonomic response within the nervous system, which is connected to neuroplasticity as well. That's another story. But the choices that we make are either subconscious or conscious, and they create a pattern that you are unaware of when you do things, whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether it's nice, whether it's not nice, whether it's helpful or harmful. The more you do things, the more your brain will go, oh, this is my automatic, my pilot, what's it called? Pilot.
Baseline.
Auto. This is my autopilot way of doing things. So it just wires it in the brain. And then it's like, whenever you're not making a conscious decision, it's defaulting into those decisions that you've made unconsciously or consciously many, many, many times before. And that is how then we get stuck in these patterns, which can really take us down a dark path in life sometimes. So, choices are, there is so much more to choices that I'd love to get into right now, but we don't really have time.
Right. So moving along to, what's our next one? Intention. So this is, kind of plays into the fact that I think we talked a little bit about this a few weeks ago when we talked about emotional intelligence. Like a key component of emotional intelligence is motivating oneself. We need to be able to motivate ourselves and have the will to do things throughout our life. And intention is kind of it's the creation of our direction in life, and we get to choose what that is. And that's a really beautiful thing. It's identifying a goal that we want to have and making the minute steps day by day. I've read a really beautiful quote earlier. It's like the actions of the small actions of your day today are creating your day tomorrow, or something to that effect, which really beautifully illustrates this point. Is if you have an intent to create a certain state of being or a certain outcome of your day or of your life, that's going to drive its creation.
And also, do you notice how you don't actually have intention without mindfulness or choices? Right. Because setting that intention, you're making a conscious choice to be mindful of that state of being, for example. Or, if you're setting an intention to not be a certain way or not do a certain thing, you are setting a conscious, you are making a conscious choice of something that you have been aware of that isn't serving your life. So we say intention, and intention is something that we bring into yoga classes all the time. We set an intention, but I think it's really important to go deeper into what does that mean, you know? And in terms of, again, Buddhist philosophy, yogic philosophy, intention is actually coming back to the purpose of the practice. The purpose defines the practice. Without the purpose, the practice isn't the truth and authentic practice. So when we're thinking about intention and rooting that within neuroplasticity, it comes from mindfulness and choices, thereby illustrate, again, you can't have one or the other. It's one and then the other. It's mindfulness and choices, then intentions.
They're all linked.
They're all linked. Yeah, so the next one is focus.
Focus. That's a big one. That's a big one that we talk about in yogic philosophy. You know, it's our discipline, our tapas, but it's also our dharan, our meditative focus. And this, you know, kind of bigger picture in our life is what helps neuroplasticity work best. If we don't have a focus, and because it takes work to overcome our conscious behaviors, we need a focus and a drive to keep doing that. And that plays into the next one, which is repetition, that we'll talk, is you need a focus and a drive to keep repeating things over and over and over again, because that's how they will get wired into our brain.
Yeah, so think about when you're multitasking, and this was me last night in the kitchen, literally trying to send a voice note, so have a conversation and cook dinner. Literally didn't work. When you're multitasking, by the way, multitasking is a myth. The brain scientifically actually can't multitask. It just flips between doing this, doing that, like all the time, like firing different pathways all the time. And what focus is really coming back down to is that when we have this single-minded focus, the mind is in a mode where it can quiet down the other parts of the mind, you know, depending on what different focus it is, particularly when you are in the creative mind and you're focusing, it quiets down the other parts of the mind, so that you can actually be a little bit more mindful and you can have a little bit more control and awareness over the different parts of your brain. And you're really getting deep into the brain now, but when we're talking about neuroplasticity within Yin Yoga, we do have to dive this deep. So the focal point also allows you to know, have I strayed off track? You know, is my mind flying away? Do I need to bring it back to the task in hand, no matter what that is? And when you have realized yes or no, and you do or you don't bring it back, then the next thing organically moving into is repetition. How, you know, we learn by repetition. Not only do we learn by repetition, but we wire things in our brain. We wire our stories, we wire our beliefs, our behaviors, our patterns, our autonomic verbal responses, our autonomic behavioral responses by the amount we do it. You're learning to play a guitar and it's mind memory. Well, that's just, you know, you're learning the finger picking in a guitar or playing the piano or any musical instrument. Because you repeat it, you're wiring it into your brain. And that is, you know, focus and repetition are so inherently interconnected that, again, it's to isolate is to be irrelevant.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so beautiful. It reminded me also what we were saying about intention, is how that word is thrown around a lot. And you know, in this context of neuroplasticity, we dive deeper. And I feel that's the same with focus. When we're talking about focus in the context of neuroplasticity, it almost mirrors, you know, that word manifestation that's thrown around a lot. Is like, when we focus, we need to be as detailed as possible, because you're right, we can't focus on multiple things at once. And thinking about this, that link between the body mind is like, our mind informs our body, who informs our mind, and it's this constant loop. And think about the goals that you might have set for yourself. Think, you know, oh, I want to be living somewhere. If you give yourself a vague goal in the future, the likelihood of you reaching it is less, because that intense focus isn't there. But when we're as detailed as possible, when we really paint the picture for what we want, I want to be, you know, in 1 week doing this, this, and this, and filling in all those details, allowing our brain to, because that's also the beauty of this creative mind, is that we can create, like an architect, the reality that we want in our mind, and our brain doesn't know if it's real or unreal based on external reality. We can create something that's just and real. If we have that focus, we can create our reality in our mind. And we'll find that, you know, through this concept of manifestation or focus, through neuroplasticity, that we can create it that way as well.
You actually just touched on pretty much the science behind the law of attraction and manifestation. And actually, without going off on a huge tangent, the science of
Like, can we
when you're
mention
talking
the
about
quantum field right now?
so, like, without going off on a huge tangent, you know, the science of manifestation, when you get down into the brain and how it all works, is rooted within neuroplasticity. So that's all I'm going to say for now. But that then beautifully takes us on to emotion. And again, just like focus and repetition, emotion and belief are very interconnected as well. So, you know, let's talk about that.
I love this reminder that emotion is energy in motion. And thinking about it, looping back to the brain, is that the way things get wired into our brain is Dr. Joe Dispenza has a beautiful model of this, but like our three brains. We have our thinking brain, we have our feeling brain, and our doing brain. Or another way is that we think something, we decide we want to embody it through the doing brain, and then it becomes conscious or unconscious habit or wired in. And that second part of it,
when it becomes a part of you inherently, right. Whether you want it or not, that's when it happens.
Right. And we all know that, like, think about your memories for a moment, and think about the ones that stand out. They're always ones that have this heightened emotional attachment to it, whether it's, you know, standing on a mountaintop in a breathtaking view, or when you got married, or a painful breakup, or the loss of a loved one. All of these supercharged emotional memories are the ones that get fast-tracked to our subconscious mind, particularly ones that are associated with negative emotion, because our brain is wired for survival as well. It's wired to constantly scan and really hold on to those things that could be potentially harmful to our well-being. So understanding that emotions are kind of that like fast track tag to experiences to get them wired in, and we can use that to our advantage for positive things. That's where, you know, affirmations come in, and really like manufacturing joy and well-being in our bodies ourselves, independent of our external environment.
And also visualizations. So just like, you know, I was just saying, like, you know, mindfulness, the word mindfulness kind of thrown around, intention is kind of thrown around, but visualization, you know, doing a visualization meditation, that is also kind of thrown around. But when you really dive deep into it, just what you were saying, like, you know, emotions wire things in harder and faster. When you have a memory and you consciously attach an emotion to it, it gets wired into your brain, into your system harder and faster. And what did I just say I was going to talk about?
I don't know, but it was about how emotions wire things into our brain harder and faster, and how I ended my statement by saying that, like, we can use that to our advantage, that just by thought alone, we can manufacture states of joy and well-being.
Visualization. Yeah. So visualization, when we are putting ourselves into a visualization meditation and we are visualizing an entire experience, whether it be within ourselves, like something internal, or whether it be an external experience, like within your environment, with other people, with other situations, when you are visualizing that, the brain and the body, you know, again, automatically create an emotion associated with that. Whatever is happening in your brain will tell your system, you know, will tell your emotional system what chemicals to release into the blood, and those chemicals will go down into the body, and those chemicals will give you an emotional body response, and that emotional body response will then send a message back to the brain and say, hey, we need to match that. So the neural pathways which match, you know, the beliefs which match that bodily response will then fire. And then this is a science of body brain connect, you know, kind of 1.0 really, really fast. But when we are doing a visualization, the body will naturally get an emotional response. So when, again, bringing it back to wiring in harder and faster, when we're visualizing that thing that we want, that well-being space that we want to be in, that all those different situations to create this experience, and when they create this experience, the body and the brain, the brain, particularly doesn't know if it's a real experience happening now or if it's a made up experience. But the experience in your head still gets wired in, and that becomes your patterns, your beliefs, your behaviors as well. And that, you know, is where we can go down kind of something like PTSD and trauma response, which is something that we are not going to get into now. But, you know, when we're thinking about that, you know, that side of things, neuroplasticity comes into that as well. How do we wire in those associations? And that's down to emotion and also the belief, because the more we experience something and the more that experience gets wired into our body brain system, whether it happened or not, whether it was a reality or an experience in our visualization or in our brain, you know, the body will start to believe it is true. And that then takes us, you know, organically into the last one, which is the belief.
Right.
Do you want to talk about belief?
Yeah, it's a very, you know, it's in the same breath as emotion, is that, you know, whatever we, you know, it's kind of getting more into like the spiritual and kind of the quantum field aspect of it. But, you know, whatever its source, belief has this energy that we cannot ignore. Is when we believe something to be true, it's more real for us. It's more real for our bodies. And when we strongly believe something, we are tapping into our higher awareness. We're tapping into the higher faculties of the human mind. And that's something that is really integral to the longevity and the sustainability of this work that we're trying to do with neuroplasticity, and reprogramming disempowering programs that we don't want and empowering programs that we do want. So that's a short-winded way to say it, but to just really think and meditate on this fact. Belief is not a new word to us. This is not a new concept, but understanding it in the terms of neuroplasticity is it's this energy, it's this component of us that is connected to our will, to our higher self, to our belief about what is true and right for us. And that will play into ultimately what we do with our lives and help us work through those hard times when we're triggered and being pulled into old patterns, or we're in autopilot and it feels way easier and way more in flow to go with a pattern that we don't want. Our belief that this is right for us, our belief that this is good for us, is going to carry us through to that focus, to that creating that emotion, to that intention, and then ultimately to that repetition. So it's kind of, you know, it's at the end of this list of 7, but it can really be at the beginning as well, because it's, you know, creating that fire that's burning it all.
Yeah, and also belief, just simply, your brain will believe whatever you tell it. If you tell it you're a hippopotamus, you know, like, it's going to believe it at some point, you know. Maybe that's gone a little bit too far. But, you know, if you tell yourself, you tell yourself, I was wrong, I shouldn't have done that, you know, I made a mistake, you know, whatever it is, you know, it could be guilt, it could be shame, it could be you just telling yourself this story. The more you repeat that, the more the brain will go, oh, I've heard this before. You know, and it will start to believe it. If you tell yourself, I am successful, I am capable, I can do this, I know what I'm doing, I am going to learn, I am going to achieve whatever it is. Like, I can, even just saying these 2 different examples, I can feel the difference in energy in my heart space. And it, you know, is a whole different energy, it's a whole different connection between the mind and the body complex. And it's like, you know, Dr. Joe Dispenza and Shad Helmstetter and some other brain anatomists and, you know, spiritual people, Bruce Lipton, he's a big one. Also James Oshman, like, these people are all cellular biologists. They're all, you know, psychologists. They all have this background in science, and they're mixing it with spirituality to basically, you know, extend and illustrate that whatever you believe, your brain will tell you, you know, whatever you tell your brain, it will believe. And also Bruce Lipton goes into perception. The biology of belief is about your perception. Whatever you perceive, however you perceive the external or internal environments or situation, your brain will wire it in. So the belief is abound to all of them, not only at the beginning, not only at the end, like you say, but, you know, in all of them as we move through. And it's so heavily rooted within neuroplasticity, which then takes me into, well, what are we doing when we're teaching? You know, when we're teaching yin yoga particularly, what are we saying? What are the lyrics in your music? You know, what messages or what communication are you giving over? Because you are wiring that into your student's brain. And there is so much more than just simple mindfulness that we can do to remove that possibility. But that possibility is there because of the nature of yin, and that nature is coming down into those theta brainwaves, which we can talk about another time.
So beautifully said. Yeah. I mean, and psychology and statistics prove it. It's the people who believe in their goals, people who believe in the best version of reality for themselves, those are the people that achieve it. Statistics show that those who believe in their goals accomplish their goals. Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is also why vision boards are, there is a science behind vision boards. This is getting a little bit off topic now, but if you want to teach yoga and you're not, you're not feeling like you're ready, you're not feeling confident enough, or like in enough knowledge or something, you can get a vision board, create visions where you ingest this feeling of success and having the life that you want. Have a vision of, I'll show you one right now.
Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful. Abundant.
Like, see
I love
it.
that sunset picture.
Yeah, like you just see it, make yourself see it every single time. This truly comes into now just living the life that you want, being the person that you want to be, surrounding yourself with those people. Like, it all comes in science, spirituality, yoga, life, philosophy. Like, it's all inherent to each other.
Yeah. And looping back into teaching in yoga for a moment is that, yes, we need to be really mindful, and everything you just said. And then on top of that, we can really employ our creativity. We know that we have this immense power to implant joy, to create joy, to help our students empower their best lives. And if we have, students that come to us repeatedly, remember, repetition is what really wires these things in. The creativity that you can have, for the space that you create, the themes that you bring in, the words that you say over and over again, you can help them along the process, be a guide, a teacher along this process to wiring in these new realities. The options are boundless.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last thing that I will say just before we close is that when we're talking about these energy and emotion, different emotions that we can stipulate and stimulate, when we're thinking about yin, let's think about the 5 elements of Chinese medicine, because that's where yin is rooted in. Yin by itself is nothing to do with yoga. We have yin on one hand, which is Taoist tradition stemming from Chinese medicine, 5 elements. And then we have yoga on the other hand, which is from India, Ayurveda, yogic roots, yogic philosophy. They are nothing to do with each other. And so yin yoga is the fusion of the two. So when we're talking about yin, and we're talking about these principles of neuroplasticity, and we're talking about emotion and belief and, all of these different energies and mindfulness, which are so heavily rooted within Taoism and the Chinese 5 elements, each element governs an energy center and governs an energy that we endow ourselves in. And so, of course, we can bring in neuroplasticity and connect it to Chinese 5 elements, which is a whole nother thing that we can do a live on. But
let's do that one next week.
Yeah, we can do that. And, it's just like showing how interconnected every single thing is. And particularly when we think about yin yoga, we do always need to think about the 5 elements. And so to do that, we've got to study Chinese medicine from a yin perspective as well, from a yin yoga perspective, because we can study it from a medical perspective, or we can study it from a yin yoga perspective. So yeah, lots of things to think about. And of course, we cover all of them. We have thought about all of this, and we cover all of them in trainings in Shanti Yoga. So if you're interested in this, then definitely get in touch with us.
Amazing. Yes, Caroline, we will definitely touch on that for next week. Such a fascinating topic.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, 33 minutes in.
I know. Every time we're like, let's actually stick to the 15-minute, but
never happens.
It never happens.
No,
classic.
It's right. Yeah. So we will love you and leave you from here, and we will be on next week with some new stuff. And we have a whole load of stuff to take you through and talk to you about. So it's never ending.
Never ending. Never ending. The circle of life.
Yeah. So other than that, thank you, Anna, for joining me here. And for anybody who is watching this, later on, if you have any questions, just tag us, either Anna or Becky, in the comments, and we'll get back to you. But other than that, see you next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.